Anthony Tony Blaze Marconi had built his name on fear. In Los Angeles, his word carried more weight than the law itself, and when his black Cadillac rolled down Sunset Boulevard, whispers trailed behind like smoke from a burning fuse. He had the city in his pocket, or at least that was what he told himself every night while nursing bourbon in the back of his favorite Italian diner. It was in that diner, on a warm September evening, that everything began to unravel. The smell of garlic and fried calamari filled the air, mingling with the faint sound of Frank Sinatra from the jukebox. Tony sat in his usual booth near the window, a cigar resting between his thick fingers, two bodyguards stationed nearby. He was reviewing accounts in his head, weighing debts owed and grudges held, when the bell above the door jingled softly. A figure entered, not loud, not threatening, just present, dressed in plain saffron robes, sandals worn thin, face calm as a still lake. The monk walked with no hesitation, crossed the diner, and without asking, slid into the booth across from Tony. The gangster stiffened immediately. His men rose halfway, hands moving to jackets, but Tony lifted one finger to stop them. He studied the man across from him, expecting some sort of message, some words, a threat disguised in riddles. But the monk said nothing. His eyes closed, his posture upright, his breathing steady. He simply sat there, as though Tony were invisible. For the first time in years, Tony felt something foreign. Not fear, not anger. Something closer to discomfort. He cleared his throat, leaned forward and growled, "You lost, old man. This ain't a charity joint." No reply. The monk remained silent. Tony tried again, louder this time, cigar smoke curling around his words. "You got business with me, you say it. Otherwise, get the hell out of my booth." Still silence. The bodyguards shifted, exchanging nervous glances. No one in Tony's world ignored him, ever. And yet, the monk's silence felt heavier than a threat. It was as if the man's calmness pressed against the walls Tony had spent his life building. In that moment, the clinking glasses, the murmur of other diners, the music, all faded. It was just him, the silence, and a presence that stripped him bare. Tony laughed harshly, though it sounded hollow. "You think you're clever? Some kind of stunt?" But his voice wavered, betraying the crack inside. The monk didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even breathe any faster. He was a mirror Tony didn't want to face. By the time the monk finally rose, bowing his head slightly before leaving, Tony's chest was tight. He snapped at his men, ordered another drink, tried to shake it off. But the image stuck, the calm eyes, the silence louder than any bullet. That night, lying in his mansion high above Beverly Hills, Tony tossed and turned. He was used to nightmares of betrayal and violence, but now the monk's stillness haunted him more than the screams of the men he'd buried. He muttered into the darkness, "What the hell was that?" But no answer came, only silence. And that silence was unbearable. Before we dive deeper into this strange and dangerous journey of power, silence, and redemption, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the rest of this incredible story that is only beginning to unfold. Tony didn't know it yet, but a seed had been planted in that diner, and nothing, not bullets, not money, not the fear of men, could stop it from growing. Tomorrow would not be the same. Chicago had raised him hard, the city's winters biting at his skin and its streets teaching him lessons no school ever could. Anthony Marconi grew up in Bridgeport, son of a dock worker who drank too much and swung harder than any belt when the rage hit. His mother Maria tried to soften the blows with prayers whispered under her breath and candles lit in St. Anthony's Church, but the boy absorbed the violence faster than the hope. By 13, he was already running errands for older boys in the neighborhood. Money drops, stolen radios, and the occasional pocket knife slipped into his hand, just in case. They called him Tony Blaze after he torched a rival kid's car as revenge for a busted lip. The name stuck, and soon so did the reputation. Older men noticed. A mid-level capo named Vinny Russo saw potential in the scrawny teenager with the cold eyes and quick fists. Vinny became both mentor and corrupter, showing Tony how power came not from prayers, but from fear. Tony learned the trade the way others learned a craft, through repetition, through silence, through watching. He drove getaway cars through icy Chicago nights, collected envelopes stuffed with dirty cash, and sat in back rooms where smoke thickened the air until it was impossible to see the ceiling. By 20, he had blood on his hands. By 25, he had his own crew. But Chicago was crowded, the old families guarding their thrones. Tony wanted more, and when an opportunity came to expand operations to Los Angeles, he seized it. The West Coast was different. Sunshine, palm trees, movie stars masking their addictions. Beneath the glitz, though, was hunger. The city was crawling with gangs ready to do business, immigrants desperate for protection, and nightclubs begging for someone to control the flow of powder that kept the music alive until dawn. Tony slid into that world with precision. He bought his way into Hollywood nightclubs, partnered with strip clubs in Koreatown, and tightened his grip on the docks near Long Beach, where cargo containers offered endless hiding places for drugs. He cultivated fear the way gardeners water roses. A smile from Tony meant safety, but a frown was a death sentence. Still, even empires built on fear had cracks. His alliance with a local Hispanic crew, Los Reyes 13, was strained. Respect mixed with resentment. They didn't like taking orders from an Italian, but they liked the money too much to walk away. For now. Tony's organization thrived on intimidation, but the pressure never eased. Every phone call might be tapped. Every new recruit might be an informant. The FBI had been circling for years, quietly gathering evidence, always a shadow on the periphery. Tony compensated with paranoia. He changed houses every few weeks, tested his men by feeding them false information, and carried a pistol everywhere, even to the shower. His right-hand man, Joey Knuckles Romano, was his most trusted ally, though even trust in Tony's world had limits. One night, sitting in the back office of a Koreatown club while neon lights flickered outside, Joey leaned across the desk. "You're spread thin, boss," Joey said, voice low. "Every corner wants a piece. The Reyes are restless. The feds ain't blind. You keep pushing and one day it all blows back." Tony lit a cigar, the flame casting sharp shadows on his face. "Let it blow. We'll be the last one standing. That's how it works. You fight, you win, you hold on, or you're nothing." Joey studied him for a long moment before nodding, but doubt lingered in his eyes. For all his bravado, Tony knew the truth. Joey dared not say out loud. The walls were closing in. Rival gangs watched, federal agents listened, and even within his own circle, ambition brewed like poison. He had climbed high, but the higher he stood, the lonelier the summit became. And as he sat in that club office, drowning in smoke and secrets, a strange unease stirred inside him, something he couldn't name yet, something that no bulletproof vest or pistol could shield him from. The storm was gathering, and he had no idea from which direction it would strike. Los Angeles thrived on noise, sirens screaming down boulevards, engines revving under neon lights, music blasting from lowriders crawling through East LA. Tony Blaze was used to the constant hum of a city that never slept, a rhythm of chaos that mirrored his own pulse. But in that diner, silence had unsettled him more than any gun ever had. The night after the encounter, he replayed it over and over, wondering who the old man was, what message he meant to deliver, and why he hadn't said a single word. By morning, curiosity had twisted into irritation. Tony told himself it was nothing, but his mind kept circling back to those calm eyes. He ordered Joey to look into it, to see if maybe the guy was tied to a rival family or the feds. Joey came back empty-handed. "Boss, he's clean. Some monk been living around East Hollywood. They say he keeps to himself, runs a small temple with a couple other guys. Nothing criminal, nothing federal." Tony frowned. "Nobody sits across from me without a reason, nobody." That evening, restless, Tony returned to the diner, same booth, same cigar, same bourbon. The clink of glasses and chatter of regulars gave the illusion of normalcy, but his eyes scanned the door every few seconds. And then, almost as if summoned by thought alone, the monk entered again. His pace was unhurried, his sandals soft against the tiled floor. The waitress barely glanced at him. It was as though he belonged, though Tony had never seen him there before. Once more the monk approached Tony's booth and sat down without a word. His hands rested lightly on his knees, his gaze lowered. Tony stiffened, jaw clenching. "You again?" he muttered, leaning forward. "You think this is funny? You following me?" Silence. Only the steady breath of the man across from him. Tony's bodyguards exchanged looks, one whispering, "Boss want us to move him." But Tony held them back. Something about the monk's composure made it impossible to treat him like an ordinary nuisance. The gangster tapped ash into the tray, his voice sharp. "Listen, old man, I don't care who you are. You don't sit here unless you got something to say." Still nothing. A muscle in Tony's cheek twitched. He raised his voice, drawing glances from nearby tables. "Say something. You don't just come sitting here in front of me like you ain't afraid." The monk finally lifted his eyes. They were dark, calm, unreadable. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. That look carried weight, as if he could see past the sharp suit, the gold watch, the cigar smoke, straight into the hollow parts of Tony's soul. For a brief second, Tony felt exposed, as though every crime, every corpse, every betrayal was laid bare under that gaze. He slammed his hand against the table, the silverware rattling. The monk didn't flinch. "Boss," Joey muttered nervously, tugging at Tony's sleeve. "People are watching." Tony realized then how uncharacteristically rattled he looked. He forced a laugh, bitter and strained, trying to reclaim his composure. "You got guts, I'll give you that. But guts get a man killed in this town." The monk lowered his gaze again, as if Tony's threats were no more substantial than smoke curling in the air. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, he rose from the booth, bowed slightly, not out of submission but acknowledgement, and walked out into the night. Tony stared after him, unsettled. His bodyguards shifted uncomfortably, unsure what had just transpired. Joey leaned in, whispering, "Boss, he ain't right. Maybe it's some head game. We should take care of it before it becomes a problem." But Tony didn't answer. He lit another cigar, though his hands trembled slightly as he struck the match. The silence the monk left behind lingered heavier than gunfire. For the first time in years, Tony Blaze, the man who commanded fear like an empire, couldn't shake the feeling that he had just been judged. And somewhere deep inside, a question began to burn. Judged by who? Sleep became a stranger to Tony Blaze. After that second encounter, every time he closed his eyes, he saw the monk's face, calm, unwavering, silent. The gangster who once slept through sirens, gunfire and storms, now tossed in silk sheets, drenched in sweat, staring at the ceiling of his Beverly Hills mansion. The silence haunted him worse than nightmares of blood. At dawn, unable to rest, he paced the marble floors, a glass of whiskey already in hand. Joey found him in the kitchen, eyes bloodshot. "Boss, you look like hell," Joey said, pulling open the fridge and grabbing a soda. "You gotta let this go. He's just some nutcase monk. You let him get in your head, that's weakness." Tony glared at him, voice sharp. "Weakness? You think I'm weak? I built everything we got. Nobody gets in my head." But even as he said it, his chest tightened, the denial tasting bitter. Joey leaned against the counter, studying him carefully. "Then prove it. You want me to take care of him? We can make him disappear. No one will even know his name." Tony froze, cigar halfway to his lips. The idea should have been simple. Problems were solved with bullets. That was the code. Yet something in him recoiled. He pictured the monk's calm face, the way he hadn't flinched when Tony slammed the table. Shooting him would feel like shooting smoke. There'd be no victory, only emptiness. "No," Tony muttered finally, shaking his head. "Not yet. I want to know what he wants first." Joey frowned. "What he wants? He's a monk. They don't want nothing except maybe donations. He ain't playing by our rules." "That makes him dangerous." Tony didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his keys and stormed out, needing air. The streets of L.A. bustled as usual, traffic snarling, vendors yelling in Spanish, palm trees swaying under the bright sun. But to Tony it all felt distant, muffled like he was walking through a haze. He ended up outside St. Ambrose Catholic Church, an old brick building tucked between a liquor store and a laundromat. The bells were ringing for morning mass. Against his better judgment, he walked inside. The air was cool, heavy with the smell of incense. Candles flickered in rows, tiny flames struggling against shadows. He hadn't stepped into a church in decades, not since his mother's funeral. The memory hit hard. Maria Marconi, kneeling with rosary beads, whispering prayers that her boy would grow up better than his father. She had begged him to leave the streets behind, but by then Tony had already spilled blood and there was no turning back. Standing in the pew, Tony's fists clenched. He whispered under his breath, almost angrily, "Ma, you got what you wanted? Some holy man staring me down like he knows me, like he knows every damn thing I've done." His voice cracked, and for a moment the tough veneer slipped. A priest approached quietly, mistaking him for a troubled soul seeking counsel. "Son, do you need to talk?" Tony snapped his head up, eyes cold. "No. I ain't your son." He brushed past the man and left, the echo of his footsteps bouncing off the walls. Back in the car, he sat gripping the steering wheel, shaking. The monk wasn't just a stranger anymore. He had cracked something open Tony had buried long ago. That evening, Tony met with his crew at a Koreatown warehouse. They discussed shipments, debts, and the recent stirrings of rival gangs. But Tony barely heard a word. His men noticed. Joey pulled him aside afterward. "You're distracted, boss. That ain't good. People smell weakness. They'll come for us." Tony forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. "Let 'em try. I'll bury every last one." Yet when he looked in the mirror later that night, cigar smoke swirling, he barely recognized the man staring back. The monk's silence had followed him there too, like a shadow he couldn't shake. And for the first time in his life, Tony Blaze wasn't sure fear alone could keep him standing. By the end of that week, Tony's empire was already under new strain. Word came down from the port. A shipment of cocaine belonging to his operation had gone missing. That meant only one thing. The cartel was testing him. Tony met with his men inside a dimly lit warehouse near Vernon, the air thick with gasoline and the faint odor of rust. Joey laid out the news with a grim face. "It's the Mexicans, boss. Los Lobos. They think we're soft. They took a container right under our noses." Tony clenched his fists, veins bulging at his temples. "Soft? I'll show them soft. Nobody steals from me and breathes after." The crew murmured their agreement, but Joey didn't look convinced. He lowered his voice. "They're pushing, Tony. They want the docks. It's about more than powder. They're coming for territory." That night, retaliation was swift. Tony's men stormed a warehouse near East LA, spraying bullets until the walls shook. When the smoke cleared, bodies were left crumpled on the ground. But in Tony's world, blood always invited more blood. 2 nights later, a black SUV rolled up outside one of Tony's clubs on Melrose Avenue. Gunfire erupted, tearing through the neon glow. 2 of Tony's men were killed instantly, and civilians, people who had just been dancing and drinking minutes before, screamed as chaos erupted. Tony arrived after the carnage, stepping over shattered glass and the smell of gunpowder. Police lights bathed the street in red and blue. His men whispered nervously around him, but Tony stood silent for a moment, scanning the wreckage. He muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "They want war, they'll drown in it." Joey, still at his side, leaned close. "Boss, you sure you're up for this?" "You look different. Ever since that old man sat across from you, it's like you ain't the same." Tony snapped his head toward him, eyes flashing. "Don't you ever bring him up again. Not here. Not now." His voice was sharp, but Joey caught something else beneath it. Fear. The next morning, Tony called a meeting at one of his Beverly Hills mansions. Around the long oak table, lieutenants and soldiers gathered. Tension filled the air, cigars glowing like embers in a furnace. Tony slammed his hand on the table. "We hit back harder. They shoot 2 of ours, we take 10 of theirs. Make the city bleed if we have to. Nobody, and I mean nobody, takes from me and walks away." Some cheered, slamming fists in agreement. Others exchanged uneasy looks. Joey studied his boss carefully, noticing the slight tremor in Tony's hands, the shadows under his eyes. When the meeting ended, Joey lingered. "Boss, listen, I've been with you since Chicago. I know you better than anyone. You're distracted. I don't care if it's the monk, the feds, or your conscience, something's eating you alive. You can't fight a war like this." Tony exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. His voice dropped to a whisper. I ain't distracted. I'm awake. That's worse. Joey frowned. Awake to what? But Tony didn't answer. Instead, he lit another cigar, eyes narrowing as though searching for something in the smoke. Later that night, alone in his study, Tony poured himself another drink. His hands shook as he gripped the glass. The image of the monk returned again, sitting across from him, silent, unyielding. Tony growled to himself, I don't got time for ghosts, not now, not ever. And yet, even as he declared war on the cartel, a deeper war was already beginning inside him, one that bullets and bloodshed could never win. The war with the cartel was only one fire burning in Tony Blaze's world. Another smoldered quietly, invisible to his men but just as deadly, the FBI. Special Agent Karen Mitchell had been watching Tony for years. Tall, sharp-eyed, with a presence that commanded respect, she carried the weight of her father's death like armor. Her father, a cop in Chicago, had been gunned down during a mob hit when she was a teenager. Every case she touched since then carried a personal edge, but none more than this one. Tony Blaze wasn't just another target. To her, he was the ghost that had haunted her family's table for decades. In a cramped office in downtown Los Angeles, Karen stood before a corkboard littered with photographs, wiretap transcripts, and maps of shipping routes. Red string-connected dots like arteries, forming the skeleton of Tony's empire. Her partner, Agent Daniel Ross, leaned back in his chair, sipping burnt coffee. He's careful, Ross said. Switches phones, rotates safe houses, never keeps dirt on his own hands. We've got scraps, but not enough for the big hammer. Karen's jaw tightened. He's slipping. I can feel it. The club shooting, the cartel pressure. He's stretched thin. That's when mistakes happen. We keep pressing. Meanwhile, Tony felt the net tightening. One night, sitting in the back of a Cadillac with Joey, he muttered, Every phone call feels like it's got ears. Every shadow feels like it's watching. You smell it too? Joey nodded grimly. They're around, boss. We've been getting whispers. Guys picked up, questioned, released. They're watching, waiting for you to breathe wrong. Tony's chest burned with anger. Let 'em wait. I don't break. But deep inside, doubt coiled. He remembered how the monk's silence had weighed heavier than threats. Strangely, the FBI's presence now felt the same. Quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. The agents kept applying pressure. A truck carrying his merchandise was intercepted on the 405. One of his soldiers disappeared after being pulled over in Compton, only to reappear days later, shaken and silent. Rumors spread. Someone was talking. In his mansion one evening, Tony gathered a few trusted men. The mood was tense, cigars burning down to ash untouched. They're in the walls, Tony growled. Somebody's feeding them. I want names. I want proof. One of the younger soldiers, Frankie, stammered nervously. Boss, maybe it's time we slow down. Lay low for a while, you know. Let things cool off. The room went cold. Joey's eyes widened in warning, but Tony moved first. He grabbed Frankie by the collar, pulling him close, his voice a hiss. Lay low, that's weakness. Weak men talk, weak men snitch. You know something, Frankie? No, boss, I swear. Frankie's face turned pale. Tony released him with a shove, the message clear, but later, alone with Joey, his tone softened just slightly. What if he's right? What if the walls really are closing? Joey exhaled slowly. Then we fight harder. That's what we do. Tony nodded, but the words rang hollow in his ears. Across town, Agent Mitchell listened to a wiretap recording. Tony's voice crackled through static, laced with frustration. It wasn't a confession, but it was something. A shift in tone, a man feeling the heat. She turned to Ross, eyes sharp. He's unraveling. Keep the pressure. He'll crack. Tony sat alone later that night, staring at his reflection in a glass of bourbon. For years he had believed bullets and fear could silence any enemy. But the FBI didn't scream or threaten. They waited, just like the monk. And Tony was starting to realize he had no defense against silence. The pressure from the cartel and the FBI gnawed at Tony like rats in the walls. But the image that tormented him most wasn't federal agents or armed rivals. It was the monk. That face, calm and steady, haunted him at odd hours, in the middle of a heated meeting, in the silence before dawn, even when he tried to lose himself in whiskey or cocaine. No matter what he did, the memory returned, demanding his attention without a single word. Finally, he snapped. If the old man wanted something, Tony would drag it out of him. He ordered Joey to stay behind, got into his Cadillac and drove east, away from the glitter of Beverly Hills and toward the crowded, cracked sidewalks of East Hollywood. The streets changed fast. Mansions gave way to graffiti-tagged walls, pawn shops, taquerias, and liquor stores with iron gates across their windows. Tony pulled up outside a small building painted in faded white. The sign above the door was simple, Dama House. Curtains fluttered in the warm evening breeze, and the faint sound of bells carried through the air. He walked inside, cigar clenched between his teeth. The temple was dim, lit only by candles. A few people were kneeling on cushions, their heads bowed. At the far end, seated cross-legged on a mat, was the monk. The same one who had unsettled him in the diner. Tony strode down the aisle, ignoring the startled looks from worshippers. He stopped in front of the monk and growled, "You, we're going to talk." The monk opened his eyes slowly, as though waking from a dream, and looked up at him. No fear, no irritation, just recognition, as if he had been expecting him. "You keep showing up where I am," Tony said, his voice rough. "What do you want from me? You with the feds, with the cartel, somebody send you?" The monk shook his head gently. His voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. "No one sent me." "Then why?" Tony's tone sharpened, his fists clenching. "Why sit across from me, not saying a damn word?" "You trying to play games with me?" "I saw suffering," the monk replied, "so I sat with it." Tony froze, words catching in his throat. For a moment he didn't understand. He had expected a threat, a demand, anything but this. "You don't know me," Tony snapped, though the protest lacked strength. The monk's gaze didn't waver. "I know suffering when I see it. You carry it like a shadow." Anger surged up inside Tony, quick and hot. "You don't know what I carry. You don't know the things I've done." The monk tilted his head slightly. "And yet here you are." The simplicity of the response struck harder than a bullet. Tony stepped back, his cigar shaking between his fingers. He felt exposed, stripped of the armor he'd worn all his life. "Listen to me," he said, lowering his voice, though it came out more desperate than he intended. "Stay away from me. I don't need you. I don't need your silence. I don't need your prayers. Stay out of my life." The monk bowed his head slightly, unoffended. "You came here," he said softly. The words cut through Tony's defenses like a blade. He turned abruptly and stormed out of the temple, his footsteps echoing against the wooden floor. Outside, the city air felt heavier than ever. He climbed into his Cadillac and slammed the door shut, but the silence he had tried to escape followed him inside. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. For the first time in years, he didn't know whether he was running toward something or running away. Tony returned from the temple with a storm raging in his chest. For years he had walked through fire without blinking, yet one old man's words now echoed louder than the gunshots of his enemies. "You came here." That line gnawed at him, cutting through his armor, leaving him restless and raw. That night he poured bourbon after bourbon, hoping to drown the memory, but the silence clung to him. When he finally passed out, sleep gave no mercy. His dreams were filled with faces, men he'd ordered killed, women who had begged for mercy, even children who had cried in the chaos he left behind. They stood in rows, staring, unblinking, as if waiting for him to confess. He woke gasping, sheets drenched in sweat. His mansion, usually a fortress of power, felt like a prison. Shadows seemed longer, the walls closer. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water on his face, gripping the sink until his knuckles turned white. His reflection stared back, but the man in the mirror looked older, beaten, haunted. By morning, his nerves were shot. Joey noticed it the second he walked into the Koreatown club. Tony's eyes were bloodshot, his hands unsteady as he lit a cigar. Joey leaned in. "Boss, you're unraveling. Guys are starting to whisper. They say you're losing your edge." Tony's temper flared. "I haven't lost a damn thing. I built this from nothing. Nobody takes it from me." Joey didn't back down. "I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying they believe it, and in this world belief is as dangerous as bullets." The words stung because Tony knew they were true. He snapped the cigar in half, tossing it aside, and muttered, "Let 'em whisper. I'll remind them who runs this city." But when night fell again, so did his strength. He turned to cocaine, lines scattered across the glass table in his office. For a few minutes, the rush gave him the illusion of control, of clarity. But it always ended the same. His heart pounding, his thoughts racing back to the monk's calm eyes, to the suffocating silence that no drug could erase. One evening, after too many drinks, Tony confronted Joey more directly. They were sitting in the back office, neon lights leaking through the blinds. "Do you ever wonder," Tony asked, voice low, "what it's all for? All the money, the blood, the fears, what's it worth in the end?" Joey blinked, surprised. "What are you talking about? It's worth survival. It's worth power. It's worth not being some nobody like our fathers." Tony shook his head slowly. "Power don't stop the nightmares." Joey stared at him, concerned. "Boss, you sound like you're slipping. You keep talking like that, the guys'll eat you alive." Tony's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell Joey everything, that the monk's silence felt heavier than prison bars, that his sins had finally found their way back to him. But the words died on his tongue. Instead, he barked, "Forget I said anything," and downed another glass. The fractures widened in the days that followed. His men sensed his distraction. Deals went sloppy, orders got delayed, and enemies smelled weakness. Even his bodyguards exchanged wary glances when they thought he wasn't looking. But the worst part wasn't the whispers or the threats. It was the way guilt now followed him like a shadow. Every time he tried to assert his authority, the silence came back. When he shouted at his men, he remembered the monk's calm gaze. When he made a threat, he wondered if his words carried any weight at all. For a man who had built his empire on control, the realization was unbearable. He was no longer in control of himself, and the cracks inside him were only beginning to show. The city was restless, and so was Tony. Nights bled into mornings without sleep, his body surviving on booze, pills, and rage. His empire was still standing, but it felt like sand slipping through his fingers. Even walking down the street no longer gave him the same thrill of dominance. It only reminded him how fragile everything was. One afternoon, after a tense meeting with suppliers, Tony decided to take a drive alone. He headed east into neighborhoods he usually avoided. The Cadillac rolled past cracked sidewalks and corner stores with peeling paint. The air smelled of street food and exhaust. Kids played soccer in an alley, their laughter sharp against the hum of traffic. For a moment the sound hit him strangely, like an echo from a life he'd never lived. At a crosswalk he noticed an old woman struggling with her grocery bags. She was hunched, frail, her steps uneven. People brushed past her, too busy to care. Something stirred inside Tony. Against every instinct, he pulled the car over. He approached her, cigar in hand, his tailored suit out of place against the grit of the block. "You need a hand, ma'am?" he asked, voice softer than usual. The woman looked up, surprised, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "I can manage," she said, though her arms trembled under the weight of the bags. Tony didn't wait for permission. He took the bags gently, carrying them toward her apartment building. The groceries were light compared to the burdens he was used to, yet his chest tightened with something unfamiliar. On the way, the woman studied him carefully. "You don't look like the type to help strangers," she said bluntly. Tony smirked faintly. Maybe I'm trying something new." Her apartment was a rundown unit on the second floor. Paint peeled from the walls, and the stairwell reeked of mildew. Tony set the bags on her kitchen counter. The space was small, cluttered, but warm in its own way. A photo of a younger woman holding a child sat on the table, framed but cracked. The old woman noticed his gaze. "That's my daughter." She passed. "The boy's all I got left now. Lives out of state." Tony nodded, swallowing hard. He thought of his own mother, Maria, her rosary beads, her prayers for him. Guilt clawed at his chest. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a thick roll of bills. He placed it on the counter without a word. The woman's eyes widened. "What's this?" "Consider it Respect, Tony said, forcing the words out. I didn't ask for your money. You didn't have to. Her gaze lingered on him, searching his face for motives. Finally, she shook her head. You look like a man who's done a lot of wrong. Tony chuckled bitterly. You don't know the half of it. No, she replied, but I can see it in your eyes. Men like you don't help women like me unless something inside them's broken. The words landed heavy. For a second, Tony almost confessed, almost poured out the weight of every sin, but instead he turned toward the door, muttering, Take care of yourself, lady. As he stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter, though not free. For the first time in years, he had done something without expecting power, loyalty, or fear in return, and that terrified him more than any rival. Later, when Joey met him at the mansion, Tony barely spoke. But Joey noticed the shift, the strange calm that flickered beneath the storm. What happened? Joey asked suspiciously. Nothing, Tony lied, pouring himself a drink. Just the city reminding me it's still alive. But deep down he knew the truth. For a fleeting moment he had been alive too. And once a man feels that, it's impossible to go back. The fragile calm that Tony felt after helping the old woman didn't last long. Within days, the streets answered back with violence. It began with whispers. Los Lobos weren't finished. They wanted to make an example out of Tony Blaze to show that no Italian, no outsider could control the ports. The warning came in fire. On a humid Friday night, one of Tony's most profitable clubs on Sunset was packed. Music thumped through walls, lights flashed, and the smell of liquor mixed with perfume and sweat. Then, in the middle of the chaos, a car pulled up outside. A package was tossed from the window. Seconds later, the explosion ripped through the building. Flames swallowed neon signs, screams tore into the night, and the glass rained down like shards of a broken star. By the time Tony arrived, sirens wailed and smoke billowed into the sky. Firefighters battled the blaze, but it was already too late. The club was gone. Among the dead were not just his men, but civilians, college kids, waitresses, people who had been out looking for fun. Innocent blood now stained his war. Tony stood on the curb, watching stretchers roll past. For once, his men didn't see rage in his face. They saw something closer to horror. Joey leaned toward him, voice low. Boss, they just raised the stakes. What do you want me to tell the crew? Tony didn't answer right away. His throat tightened, chest heavy. He should have barked orders, demanded revenge, doubled the blood. But instead his eyes caught movement across the street. Through the haze of smoke and flashing lights, he saw him, the monk, the same calm figure, walking slowly down the sidewalk, robes brushing against the ashes. He didn't stop, didn't approach, didn't even look directly at Tony. He simply passed, silent, like a shadow carried by the wind. Tony's stomach churned. Why now? He muttered under his breath. Boss? Joey asked, confused. Nothing, Tony snapped, forcing his voice steady. Get the boys ready. We're not going to take this lying down. But inside, something broke. The next day, the news tore into him from all sides. Police investigations closed in. Journalists plastered his name across headlines. Families of victims wailed on television, demanding justice. And the FBI tightened its grip, convinced they finally had leverage to bring him down. Inside his Beverly Hills mansion, Tony poured another drink, staring at the TV as footage replayed the explosion. His face reflected in the glass screen, smoke and fire flickering over his features. Joey paced behind him. This ain't just business anymore, Tony, Joey warned. They killed civilians. The city's out for blood. The cops, the feds, everybody. If we hit back now, we'll be fighting on every side. Tony slammed the glass down, shattering it. I don't care if it's the whole damn city. Nobody burns what's mine, nobody. But the conviction in his words faltered. For the first time, Tony felt like he was drowning in forces too big to crush. Rival gangs, federal agents, public outrage, it was all converging, and he was in the middle, suffocating. That night, he sat alone in his study, cigar smoke curling upward. His mind replayed the monk's presence outside the fire. He whispered to himself, almost afraid of the thought, Was he there to judge me or to save me? The city outside roared with traffic and sirens, but inside Tony's chest, silence spread like wildfire, and he couldn't escape the feeling that the world he built was collapsing faster than he could hold it together. The blast at the club had shaken the city, but it shook Tony's crew even more. In his world, power thrived on confidence and cracks spread fast. Rumors whispered through his empire. Maybe Blaze was losing his touch, maybe the cartel was too strong, maybe the old days of fear were slipping away. And Joey Knuckles Romano, the man closest to him, had started to let those doubts grow louder. It began with small gestures, Joey questioning orders, speaking more boldly in meetings, gathering support from younger soldiers who looked to him as the steadier hand. Tony noticed. He always noticed. But part of him didn't want to believe it. Joey had been with him since Chicago, through the cold nights and blood-soaked mornings. Loyalty, he thought, meant something, or at least it used to. One night, the tension finally broke. They were in the Koreatown Club's back office, neon bleeding through the blinds, smoke curling from Tony's cigar. Joey leaned on the desk, eyes locked on his boss. "Tony," Joey said carefully, "I've been thinking. The way things are now, maybe it's time for fresh leadership, someone who ain't distracted." Tony's brow furrowed. "What did you just say?" Joey didn't flinch. "You've been slipping, the guys see it. You're thinking too much, losing sleep, talking about monks and ghosts. That ain't you. And while you're unraveling, the cartel's burning us down and the feds are circling. Somebody's got to keep this thing alive." The words struck like bullets. Tony's chest tightened, rage flooding in. "You? You think you can take what I built with my blood? You think you can wear my crown?" Joey's jaw clenched. "It ain't about crowns, Tony. It's about survival. And right now, you're not leading us anywhere but a grave." For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. The air smelled of sweat and betrayal. Tony rose slowly, setting his cigar down, his hand drifting toward the pistol at his waist. "You were my brother," Tony said, voice low, trembling with fury. "I trusted you when nobody else could be trusted. And this is how you pay me back." Joey's own hand twitched toward his holster. "I did everything for you, Tony. I took beatings for you, pulled triggers for you, buried bodies for you. But I ain't gonna let you drag us all into the grave 'cause some monk looked at you funny." That line was too much. The room erupted in violence. The two men drew at the same time. Gunshots thundered in the small office, plaster and glass shattering around them. Joey stumbled back, blood blooming across his chest. His eyes widened, betrayal etched deep, before he collapsed onto the carpet. Tony stood over him, chest heaving, pistol shaking in his hand. The world around him seemed to blur. He dropped to his knees beside the body, grabbing Joey's shirt. "You were my brother," he whispered again, voice breaking. The crew outside rushed in, finding their boss kneeling over Joey's body. No explanation was needed. The truth was written in blood on the carpet. But what they saw wasn't strength. It was weakness, despair, the image of a king who had just killed his most loyal knight. That night, word spread fast. Blaze had killed Joey. His empire trembled. Men who had once sworn loyalty now questioned everything. Some slipped away quietly. Others muttered about betrayal. Trust, once his greatest weapon, had crumbled into dust. Tony locked himself in his mansion afterward, pacing in the dark, gun still in his hand. He could feel it now, clearer than ever. He was alone. The cartel pressed from one side, the FBI from another, and now his own family had turned to ash. But worse than all of that was the silence that filled the room after the gunfire faded. Deafening, suffocating, the same silence that Monk had carried with him. And Tony began to realize there was no one left to fight but himself. Tony's mansion had never felt so hollow. The marble floors, the chandeliers, the walls lined with paintings worth more than most people's lives. It all seemed like a museum of lies. Every tick of the grandfather clock echoed louder, every creak in the empty halls pressed against his ears. Joey's blood still stained his mind, a mark that whiskey couldn't wash away. He sat in the study with the curtains drawn, the room suffused with smoke. A pistol rested on the desk beside half-empty bottles. His reflection in the glass cabinet looked like a stranger, eyes sunken, skin pale, hair disheveled. For decades, he had defined himself by control, but now he couldn't even control his own thoughts. The silence became unbearable. He turned on the TV, flipping through channels, but no distraction held him. News anchors spoke his name, their voices sharp with condemnation. Anthony Marconi, known as Tony Blaze, is believed to be behind escalating violence in Los Angeles, including the recent club bombing. He muted it, but the images of flames and bodies lingered. He closed his eyes only to see Joey again, gasping his last breath. Then other faces came, one after another. Men he had executed, women who had begged, children who had screamed. They gathered around him in the dark, their eyes hollow, their mouths silent. "Get out of my head!" he roared, throwing the bottle across the room. Glass shattered against the wall, but the ghosts remained. Hours passed. Outside, the city glowed with restless energy, but Tony felt sealed in a coffin of his own making. He pressed his palms against his temples, breathing raggedly. What if the monk was right? The thought unsettled him more than any FBI raid or cartel ambush. He remembered the monk's voice, quiet but firm. "I saw suffering." So I sat with it. That voice returned now, mingling with the silence, filling the space where his rage used to live. Unable to bear it, Tony stumbled to the balcony. The night air was heavy with smog, the city stretching endlessly below. For a moment, he considered stepping over the edge. Maybe that would silence the noise once and for all. But something stopped him. A flicker of memory. His mother's face, her voice in a church whispering prayers. She had begged for his salvation, even as he walked deeper into darkness. Tears stung his eyes, unexpected, unwanted. He fell to his knees, muttering through clenched teeth. "Ma, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I don't know who I am anymore." The weight of it all crashed down at once. He had lost his men, his brother, his empire. He had lost himself. The pistol on the desk called to him, but even that felt like a coward's exit. Instead, he sat in silence for the first time in his life, not forced, not angry, just still. The silence pressed against him, but strangely it didn't suffocate. It revealed. For the first time he understood what terrified him so deeply. It wasn't the monk or the FBI or the cartel. It was himself. He whispered into the empty room, "I can't keep running." As the night stretched toward dawn, a decision began to take shape inside him, fragile but undeniable. His whole life had been built on taking, on conquering, on killing. But the monk's words lingered like a lifeline. "You came here." And now, for the first time, Tony Blaze realized he needed to go back. The sun rose slowly over Los Angeles, but Tony didn't move. He sat in the chair staring at the pistol, the ghosts fading into the edges of the room. He wasn't ready to pick up a gun, he was ready to put one down. The night had broken him, but in that breaking, something new began to stir. When morning light finally broke over the city, Tony felt hollow, like something inside him had cracked wide open. He didn't shower, didn't change his clothes. He just grabbed his keys, slid into his Cadillac, and drove without thinking. The streets blurred past, freeways choked with traffic, graffiti-covered walls, the endless sprawl of Los Angeles. His hands shook on the steering wheel, but his direction was clear. He was going back to the monk. The temple looked the same as before. Plain walls, chipped paint, incense smoke curling gently into the air. But this time Tony entered differently. No cigar, no arrogance, no threats. Just a man dragging the weight of his sins behind him. Inside, the monk sat cross-legged, eyes closed, breath slow and steady. Tony stopped in front of him, chest heaving, voice breaking. "You win, all right?" he rasped. "I can't take it no more. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I can't breathe without seeing the faces. All the people I put in the ground, all the lives I burned for money, for power. It's eaten me alive." The monk opened his eyes slowly, calm as ever. He studied Tony not with judgment, but with quiet recognition. Tony fell to his knees, hands trembling. "I killed my own brother, my only friend left. I put a bullet in him because he wouldn't bow. And the worst part? I don't even know if I was protecting my empire or just my pride." His voice cracked. I'm empty, man, I'm hollow. You see it, don't you? The monk's voice was gentle. The prison outside or the prison inside, you can only escape one. Which will you choose? Tony's head dropped, his shoulders shaking with sobs. He hadn't cried since he was a boy, not even at his mother's funeral. Now the tears poured freely, hot and unrelenting. I don't know how to get out, he admitted. Tell me what the hell I'm supposed to do. The monk did not lecture, did not condemn. He simply sat in silence, his presence steady as stone. After a long pause, he said softly, "Begin by telling the truth." The words struck like a revelation. Tony lifted his gaze, eyes red, lips trembling. "The truth?" "Yes," the monk said. "The lies you tell yourself are heavier than the lies you tell the world." Tony pressed his hands against his face. "The truth is I'm tired. I'm tired of killing, of running, of pretending I'm in control. I ain't in control. I never was." The monk nodded once, as though this confession mattered more than any fortune, any power. Silence filled the room again, but this time it didn't suffocate Tony. It felt different, like space opening up inside his chest. For the first time, he wasn't fighting it. He was allowing it in. After a long while, the monk spoke again. "You cannot undo what has been done, but you can stop doing more harm. You can take responsibility. That is where freedom begins." Tony's breathing steadied. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, voice hoarse but resolute. "Then maybe it's time I stop running from what I am. Maybe it's time I face it head on." The monk lowered his gaze once more, returning to silence. The conversation was over, though no final words were needed. Tony sat there for several minutes, staring at the floor, the weight on his chest shifting into something else. Not relief, not yet, but direction. For the first time in decades, he knew what his next move had to be. When he finally rose, his knees ached, his body heavy. But his eyes carried something new, resolve. He walked out of the temple into the Los Angeles sunlight, no longer a king, no longer a ghost, just a man about to surrender to the truth. Tony drove for hours after leaving the temple, but every road seemed to lead to the same conclusion. His Cadillac rolled past palm trees swaying in the hot wind, past strip malls, motels, taco stands, and neon crosses glowing over small churches. Los Angeles stretched endlessly, but for the first time he didn't feel like the city belonged to him. It was bigger, heavier, indifferent, and he was just a man who had poisoned it for too long. By nightfall, he pulled up outside the LAPD headquarters downtown. The towering building loomed above him, its lights cold and merciless. He sat in the car with the engine running, staring at the entrance. His heart pounded against his ribs like it wanted to escape before he could go through with it. The pistol lay on the passenger seat. For years it had been his shield, his answer to every problem. Tonight, it looked like dead weight. He picked it up, stared at it, then shoved it into the glove compartment. "No more," he muttered, voice hoarse. Stepping out, he adjusted his suit jacket. His shoes clicked against the concrete as he crossed the plaza. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also strangely lighter, as though with every movement forward, he was shedding a layer of chains. Inside, the lobby was sterile, bright, buzzing with officers moving between desks. Conversations stopped when they saw him. Anthony Tony Blaze Marconi, the man who had terrorized the city for decades, now stood at their front desk unarmed. A young officer's hand instinctively went to his holster. "Sir, hands where I can see them." Tony raised his palms slowly. "Relax, kid. I'm here to give you what you've been looking for." The room froze. Another officer hurried over, disbelief written all over his face. "You're turning yourself in." Tony's jaw tightened. "That's right. No lawyers, no deals. I'll tell you everything. Every crime, every name, every dollar. I'm done." Word spread quickly through the station. Within minutes, Special Agent Karen Mitchell arrived, her face a mask of steel, though her eyes betrayed shock. She had chased this man for years, built her career around bringing him down. And now here he was, surrendering voluntarily. She stepped closer, her voice sharp. "Why now, Blaze? After all this blood, all these years, Why walk in here tonight?" Tony met her gaze, and for once there was no bravado, no smirk, no threat, only weariness. "Because I finally saw myself, and I can't live with it no more." Mitchell studied him for a long moment, searching for lies. But there were none. She nodded curtly, signaling to the officers. "Cuff him." As the cold steel locked around his wrists, Tony exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Strangely, he didn't feel weaker. He felt free. The ride to the holding cell was silent. Reporters had already gathered outside, cameras flashing as he was escorted in chains. Shouts filled the air. "Tony! Why now? Are you cutting a deal? Do you regret the lives you destroyed?" Tony kept his eyes down, ignoring them all. Regret. It wasn't a word big enough for the weight he carried, but he knew this was the only road left. In the cell that night, he sat on the thin mattress staring at the grey wall. For decades he had feared cages more than anything. Now for the first time he didn't fight it. The prison outside didn't matter anymore. The one inside had been worse all along. He closed his eyes, letting the silence settle over him, and for the first time, he didn't resist it. He embraced it. Tomorrow, he would speak the truth, and the world would finally hear it. The courtroom was silent when Tony Blaze entered in chains. The man who once commanded entire neighborhoods with a glance now shuffled in an orange jumpsuit, head bowed, the weight of decades pressing on his shoulders. Reporters filled the benches, pens scratching, cameras flashing, desperate to capture the fall of a king. He didn't fight the charges. He didn't hire slick lawyers or bargain for leniency. When the judge asked for his plea, Tony's voice was steady, even calm. Guilty to all of it. The room stirred with disbelief. Never in Los Angeles history had a man of his stature confessed so openly. Over the weeks that followed, Tony's testimony unraveled his empire. He named names, detailed operations, exposed the pipelines of money and drugs. Some called him a traitor, others called him brave. Tony didn't care what label they gave him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't lying, to them or to himself. Prison was supposed to be the end. Cold walls, iron bars, the sound of locks clicking shut. But strangely, Tony found something inside those walls that he had never found in his mansions or nightclubs. Peace. The ghosts didn't vanish overnight, but when they came, he no longer tried to bury them under whiskey or cocaine. He sat with them, like the monk had sat with him. Word spread quickly among inmates that Tony Blaze had changed. Some laughed, others tested him, expecting the old fury. But when a young kid from South Central, barely 20, came to him shaking with fear after his first week inside, Tony didn't respond with threats or power plays. He simply listened. He told the kid the truth. This life don't end well. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Soon others sought him out, not for deals or protection, but for advice, for honesty. The feared gangster became something unexpected, a counselor. Not a saint, not forgiven, but a man who had finally chosen to stop adding to the fire. On visiting days, when the press had long stopped caring, one quiet figure still came. The monk, robes simple, sandals worn. He would sit across from Tony without words, just as he had in that diner so long ago. And Tony no longer raged at the silence. He welcomed it. "I get it now," Tony told him one day, hands resting on the table, chains rattling softly. "You didn't come to scare me. You didn't come to take nothing. You just came to show me the mirror, and I finally looked." The monk bowed his head slightly, saying nothing, but his eyes carried the answer. In the stillness of prison, Tony had found something he never expected, a strange kind of freedom. Years passed, and the name Tony Blaze faded from headlines. New criminals rose, new empires crumbled. But inside his cell, Anthony Marconi lived differently. He wrote letters to families he had wronged, though most went unanswered. He joined meditation circles led by volunteer monks. And he kept talking to the younger inmates, urging them not to follow the path that had destroyed his life. One night, lying on his thin prison mattress, Tony whispered into the darkness, "Ma, I hope you can see me now. I ain't the man you wanted, but maybe I'm trying to be the man you prayed for." For the first time in decades, he slept without nightmares. The feared gangster had surrendered not just to the law, but to truth. And in that surrender, he discovered the one thing power and money had never given him: peace. And if you followed Tony's journey all the way to this point, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this one. Tales of transformation, downfall, and redemption. And right now on your screen, click the video we've suggested. It will take you deeper into another incredible story you won't want to miss.